Hello and welcome to this month's edition of In the Labs with Tim Sway. I'm your host Tim Sway and this is my lab in... What is that noise? Oh, that's right, it's me. This month's project is a development of a project I did a few months back where I made a shot glass, and I wanted to see if I could get better at doing two-sided 3D models that then fit together. With Easter just around the corner, I thought, well, why not do an egg? But I didn't want to just do a solid egg. I thought it would be cool to make an egg shaker, because as many of you may know, I make a lot of musical instruments like the ones that are on the wall behind me. This came out really good. I'm really proud of it, and I'm going to show you how I did it right now. I started with a simple egg vector that I downloaded off the web, and it wasn't clean enough to just convert into a vector, so I just used it as a model to trace the shape. I used the oval creation tool, and then I put it into the node editing mode so I could just kind of tweak it and make it look just right. Then it was just a matter of clicking over to the modeling side of the tooling section and create an actual 3D model from this simple shape. And don't forget, you can log into your V&Co account at vectric.com to get these files for free. It only took a few minutes of experimenting with the Create Shape modeling tool to find the proper percentages to make it look egg-shaped. Once I was happy with that, I copied it so I'd have two halves, and then I took just the profile that I had drawn and copied that to the other side of the file to hollow it out on the backside. I can't just make the shape from that profile because it would go right to the edge and it would disappear. I had to create that little lip. So I used the offset feature to make a slightly smaller egg on the inside, and then used the same shape profile tool to hollow out the inside by just creating a reverse of the shape. I used a negative number in the field to make it go backwards. Here I'm just drawing some lines because I want to put ridges on the inside of it to help give something for the material in the inside to grate along. Then I created a circle just to space those lines apart. And there you have it. I have two shapes that look like eggs, and they're hollowed out to where I have about a 2/10 of an inch shell around the egg. I knew I needed to use some 3D tabs from the clip art section of Vectric, so I put those in to create something to help me hold my eggs in place. I drew a box around the eggs that I'm going to use as my guide for when I 3D carve these out. I'm going to carve out that whole entire box section so I can make sure I get some nice clean edges. I used my typical system of putting 3 random holes into both sides of the file, so I can put one set of them into the wasteboard and the other set into the work, and that way when I flip it over it's guaranteed to have the proper alignment. And now I'm just creating some toolpaths using that box that I had built around the eggs to carve them out. I used a 1/4 inch end mill to rough it and a 1/4 inch ball nose to finish it. Pretty straightforward stuff, and I would definitely carve the hollowed out side first before I flip it. I just feel like that would be a better procedure for doing this. While I was simulating it and thinking about it, I remember having difficulty lining up my shot glass when I put those two parts together, so I thought I should solve that problem. I modeled in these 2 pegs that would then line up to each other, but that wasn't going to work either because they would just be 2 positions, so I made little holes that are the same size as these skewers that I have in my shop, so I could just drill in just about, I think, 15/100ths of an inch into each one as a little place that I could stick these little sticks in, and then they would get forced to line up together. I used the same 1/4 inch ball nose for the striped ridges that went through the egg, but I did have to change to an 1/8 inch end mill to drill those little holes because they're just smaller than a 1/4 inch. Check this out, I just learned this trick. If you move your mouse around on the computer screen, you can see down here there's X, Y axis and Z axis locations that sort of appear, which is, super handy, of course. But if you hold down the control key while you do that, you get an additional piece of information right here that shows you the thickness of the model that you've created. I'll do a screen grab of this so you can see it, but it's right down here in the bottom. Right here is 0.1851 inches thick. Right here is 0.1885, 0.19. This is super useful when doing two-sided carves. You need a block of wood that's about 5 inches by about 8 inches by 1 inch thick to do this. For my first run, I'm using this kind of piece of scrap cut off Kumaru decking. I wanted to take a second to talk about tramming, and I'm not talking about commuting downtown on a small light rail. I don't know what that means. A few months ago, you may remember I made these wooden shot glasses, and I was having some issues in the process with this. I made it the same way as this egg with these two like half circle shapes that I glued together, and you can see how one side is thicker than the other, and I really couldn't figure out why, because in the file everything was exactly the same. What it turns out to have been was a tramming issue. So what could be happening, and I'm going to over-exaggerate here, is that my router was not lined up perfectly straight with my work and with my wasteboard, so in essence the router bit was cutting like this. So I'm going around, if you're doing 2D files, it's probably not much of a big deal. But when you get into 3D and you start going like this, you can see how one side is going to get cut more than the other side. Now everybody has a different CNC and a different setup, I'm sure, so I can't speak to everyone and how they would set their tramming up, but on my Avid CNC there's this great little plate, and it's designed to where you can twist with a wrench, you can sort of twist this bolt and then tighten it into place and check it out to get your tramming to be perfectly flush. Now how can you tell if that's perfectly flush? You can use like a straight edge and guides like that and stuff, and that will get you pretty close, but the best way is to actually run a file and see what happens. And what you want to do is run a file, just create a pocket and just cut into some scrap wood, just, you know, minimally deep, you know, maybe like 5/100ths of an inch. But you want to change your step over rate. So normally when we do paths, we have the blade step over itself quite a bit so you don't get those lines and it gets a nice even cut. Change your step over rate to about 95%, so it really does wide passes and it's cutting through, the whole blade is cutting each time. And you'll be able to see in those big wide cuts if your groove looks like this, or if it looks like this, or if it looks like this. So there you saw I ran a kind of typical toolpath with about 20% step over, and then I ran it again with a 95% step over so you could see the difference, and you can see the lines in this MDF, which is probably the best material to use for doing this type of test of where the bit went. And you can also see that my machine is really well set up, and I certainly wasn't going to knock it out of alignment just for a demonstration. But here with the straight edge, you can see, even though you can see the lines there, that they're actually flush. You can't see any bumps, and I can't feel any bumps. I can just see the subtle witness mark of where the tool went. If my machine were out of a tram, you would actually see ridges like this with like an angle going down like this. It would be consistent, and you'd be able to see them and feel them, and then you would know that you need to tweak your router the other direction to even it out and get this. I just did a small 6x6 area here to show you as an example of how this testing can be done. But if you were having issues or you were setting up a new machine, you would probably want to do your entire cutting area to make sure everything is okay everywhere. This is a great way to do it. So you could simply run like a wasteboard leveling toolpath, but change your step over to 90 or 95% on your bit. Go shallow, do the whole board, take a look at it, make your corrections, and then once you've got it right, just go and level your whole wasteboard again. And you're going to have a dead perfect CNC machine. Okay, maybe I'm getting carried away. You don't have to do your whole machine, but if you do a little section and you see there's a problem, then you might want to consider doing some more areas to make sure it all works out. So here I'm carving out the inside of my first attempt at the egg using that Kumaru, and there's my switch to the 1/8 inch end mill to put these little teeny tiny pockets in there for my dowel I'm going to use later. Most pencils are 3/10 of an inch thick, and so I cut little pencil dowels to do this. And you might think it's wasteful, but believe it or not, those top 2 pencils in there I've used maybe 30 times, and one of them finally broke, so I had to cut another one. So it's not really wasteful at all. This piece of wood I'm using is the end of an old deck board. So there's a very good chance that this whole project will fail because this crack is going to come right through it. But I was just doing a test cut, and so I just figured I didn't expect the cut to go as well as it has, and it's going well, so we'll see if I can salvage this or not, but I did plan on running it again, and I would recommend, especially since you're carving something so thin, to check your wood for stuff like that. I just wanted to explain that. I ran the other side of the file, and as I expected, that crack was a problem. That crack was a problem. You can see it lines right up there. This one surprisingly lasted, but I went and I ran the whole file anyways because I wanted to check my thickness and see if I thought it was too thick or too thin. Yeah, I think this is going to work. I just need to get the right wood. In case you didn't remember this about me, I only work with reclaimed wood for the most part, so I found this little piece of maple butcher block countertop that I actually made a guitar out of it, and that's one of the cutoffs from that. It was a little too thick, so I ran it through the planer, and then I ran my file again.
This one came out really good. The maple is a little bit of a tighter grain, so you can see because I didn't do a final profile path, I just did this ball nose path. There's just this little thin layer of wood here that's between the two layers, which is really actually good for me because it kept things nice and secure, and it's nothing, I mean, I'm pushing through it with my finger here. I don't want to do that anymore though, because I don't want to risk breaking it. So now I'm just going to take it over to the bandsaw and cut it out real quick, glue it together, and then all that stuff, I'm just going to leave it until I've got it glued together, and then I can sand it off.
Since the egg is so thin and fragile, I figured it made more sense to not even worry about trying to cut close to the lines here. I just rough cut it out, and I figured it'd be safer to do that final sanding when it's glued together in a more secure state. This is either going to confirm your suspicions about me or tell you more than you want to know. But now I want to fill my egg with something to shake, and rice is commonly used, and you can use sand and all these different types of things, dried beans perhaps. You're going to get a different sound, of course, for these different materials. So I went rooting through my pantry at home. We were all out of rice, but what we did have was some organic popcorn and some farro. Yeah. My wife wouldn't let me take the lentils. I'm not quite sure which one I want to use yet, but fortunately I can kind of try them out to see what I like. So I have some corn here. This is these dried corn kernels. Let's give them a listen. I'm just going to close this and hold it tight by hand. Sounds good. You don't want to put too many in. You can see I'm putting maybe 20% the volume. They need to have room to move. Now we'll try the farro. A little bit of a higher pitch. I think there might be a little too much in there. Now my instinct told me I would like the farro better, but I'm starting to think that I like the corn better because it's louder. Let's go with corn. I always keep these bamboo skewers in the shop. They come in handy for stirring things and whatnot. The one downside to bamboo is when you cut them, they're a little stringy because it's actually not wood, it's a grass. And it's all the grain is kind of stringy. But that was what I had laying around that I measured this hole to. And these are not, they don't have to be pretty, they just have to be guides to help me line this up properly. You could use a saw too, but I have found with the saw I tend to have messier edges. I was afraid to make the holes too deep in the eggshells for fear that might break because the wood there is so thin. So it's a little tricky cutting these tiny little pieces to line these up. But honestly, you could probably line these up without them. But I had this feeling I was going to leave that edge unsanded. And so these pins did really make it easier. Alright, let's see if I put enough glue on there. Pretty cool. I was a little afraid of over sanding that edge, and so I did leave it probably a little proud of where it needs to be. So the egg does have a slight ridge around that center line because I really didn't want to make it too thin and break it. But it's egg shaped enough to make me happy. This is just a little homemade polish I put on it. This was so much fun. You can see the seam here isn't quite perfect, and that's because I forgot to just sort of sand these two things level real quick before gluing them together. I was so excited to glue it together, so I would recommend just sanding that a little bit to get a better seam. And don't forget, if you're an Aspire user, you can log into your V&Co account and download this project and make it for free. But what I really like about this project is it doesn't have to be an egg shaker. You could actually just bypass the one side of the carve altogether and make solid eggs out of various species and colors of wood, which would be a really nice art project unto itself. I think I might try that. And of course, you can manufacture all sorts of musical eggs. You can put different types of things inside them to make them sound different, as we looked at. And I definitely plan on making more of these and selling them at my website where I sell the guitars and other musical instruments I make. This is a great product that I can have readily available, that I can sell inexpensively. And as far as for doing art things, why not experiment with some glue-ups, or even just using something like plywood where you can get some really cool textures and colors. It might be fun to do a bunch of stripes and different geometric patterns in these before you cut them out. Also, I don't think the ridges inside are necessary. I'm not sure if I hear them, but it's really not a big deal to do it. And if anything, it makes the shell a little bit thinner, which will make it a little bit louder and more percussive-like. So keep it if you want it. Maybe experiment without it. Do what you want with that file. It is yours to keep. Thank you very much for joining me on another excellent edition of In the Labs with Tim Sway. I hope my puns and yokes didn't crack you up too much, but I tell you what, after all this work, I am fried. So I'll quiche you later.